All right, it's time for that moment when. It's time for the episode 8 review. Yeah, so a couple things to start off with. First of all, initially held off with recording a bunch of episodes initially because I realized it would be really funny if the 69th episode was me reviewing the Switch 2 Direct or reacting to the Switch 2 Direct. But not only does that not actually matter, but I feel like there's other stuff I'm going to want to talk about prior to the Switch 2 Direct, so whatever. Still, it's pretty funny. Anyway, this was something that as soon as I saw it, I went, oh, I feel like I do need to talk about it. And then I also rewatched the entire show and have watched this episode maybe 4 or 5 times. So I have a pretty solid opinion on it. I will say this is a show that I had enjoyed, but I really had kind of not exactly like one where, because one, I enjoyed the full show, but one episode was like so much better that the rest of the show was bad by comparison, which or maybe not bad by comparison, but was just like kind of there. Like, I don't know. Most of my initial watching of this show was for the comedy bits and whatever, and then episode 6 is like one of my favorite episodes in the entire like OSC. It's up there, which is really funny because then you have one, which I don't remember. It might actually also be episode 6 of one, which is the one that's in French, where Backpack breaks his leg and then drowns and the whole thing. And that whole episode is also, I mean, that is my favorite episode in the OSC, pretty heavy handedly. I love that episode. Anyway, the point is that episode 6 of this show, of It's Time for the, was pretty much the other one that was pretty much up there. And obviously, like, it had some inspiration from stuff like Animatic Battle and whatever, but I think it executed so much better, and I think it's just a much more enjoyable show in general. Obviously, also, this show has a much smaller overall cast, or like base cast. There were only 10 original contestants, and then you have kind of the larger cast that comes from the recommended characters that is pretty funny. In fact, I think the recommended character bits are maybe the only bad part about the show, and that's simply just because you have to wait for them to end. And even then, like, some of them are pretty fast, like the one in episode 7, I believe, where they're going for the gift box. And yeah, maybe this will end up being more of a series review because I've actually now rewatched everything. I think episode 6 is probably still my most watched episode of the season, or this show. I assume there won't be a season 2. I've actually done a minor amount of research on this one, not in terms of this episode, in terms of like its lore implications too much, because I know some people have been, they read really deep into it, or they, they reversed audio. I didn't do that, and I don't yet care to know about it, which obviously I had some like minor Nightly Manor spoiler stuff that like I got kind of informed of through comments, but I haven't seen any of that with this. But I had seen the reception, which has been all over the place. I see a lot of people who, again, I mean, I get it. People watch certain shows for different things, and like I've talked about with my own opinions on something like Teapot, right, where that is a show where I don't feel that the serious implications or the lore implications work well. This is not the case with ITFT. I think that the show does a lot better. I don't think it's necessarily incredible, and I don't think it's anything remotely comparable to 1, because 1 has enough mystery that's like, it doesn't tell you enough for it to have enough holes, which is, I think, the best way to do it. It definitely has holes, but they're not that big, and they're still explainable. pretty easily versus ITFT could very easily become a problem. Still, in terms of what else they did, there was a lot of like supposedly kind of non-canon stuff that became canon with some of the eliminated contestants coming back, um, which I think was a choice. I don't think it was a bad choice at all. Felt Container in like full 3D ish looked really cool. Like they really made them look 3D. That was really fun. Um, it does mean you kind of don't get like the actual intro in this episode, which is a bit unfortunate. Um, Refill Station, I think, was probably the contestant to get eliminated. I think that was just a good, like it was a close vote. It seems like they were not that far away from each other. Like they were only 1,000 votes between like each of the four contestants up for elimination, which I think says a lot about how good all the contestants are right now. Like Vase, I think, was the last like really basic character. Um, and Vase isn't even bad. She's just not like the most interesting, and like most of her interesting stuff came from being with Star Jar. Obviously, you do have No Way, but No Way also has lore tie implications and all this stuff. And he's also just kind of, I mean, he functions as the fiery. I do think he will win, most likely, which I think is funny, but I don't know. Um, like everyone else is good. I know people have been saying that, you know, does this mean that Sun is eliminated and Wheel is rejoining? I'm gonna be honest, I don't think so, but maybe I'm wrong. I thought the whole bit of this episode was that um, I thought the whole bit of the episode was that this is a not necessarily an alternate timeline, but a very distant future. Um, because the whole thing of Clock being in the sun and then like getting cooked up and like the numbers going up for the hours before it resets and he gets back. I thought it was more of a time travel thing. I'm not sure what the watchtower symbolizes. I know obviously it caused like the blackout and all this stuff. Um, and even if like the clock in like the normal world is the same as this, like there's all these little things, right? Um, but I'm not entirely sure. I genuinely am not entirely sure. I do feel like I'm curious if they're gonna stop it at noon, or not noon, like 12. I wonder if 12 is the last episode that they will do, and therefore maybe there'll only be four more episodes: 9, 10, 11, 12. Because we started at 1. So I'm curious if that's how it's gonna be. Um, but yeah, I think it was interesting. They were like, who should get a prize? There was no elimination, and that Wheel was included. But like, yeah, it was a very odd choice. I'm not entirely sure I completely understand what they are trying to do. Maybe Wheel is rejoining, maybe Sun is gone, but I think that would be surprising because that's, I mean, it's just kind of a, like, again, this is a show that not only does a lot, and this is another thing I'll bring in, but like, wow, if I could talk normally, that'd be great. But like, it's not just that this show does a lot for, again, you have the recommended characters showing up and like they're pretty prominent. You have the voting, which is, so you have viewer voting. You also have viewer comments, like having animated stuff. Like this show is very engaging with its audience. I feel like them doing a forced elimination or auto elimination would be pretty insane. Like that just seems so not what they would want to do. Um, like I have the feeling it would, like, I remember when BFDI A17 happened, and I thought that tennis ball and like fries might get like eliminated from existence or something for a bit. And they never did that, and they just brought him back. I have the feeling that will probably happen, but maybe Sun is dead. I don't know. I hope not. I mean, it's not my favorite character, but like one of the, better ones. Like I don't know. I don't know how I feel about. I don't know how I feel about that. In terms of the humor of this episode, some people have said that the humor was not on par, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't agree. I actually think this was one of the funniest episodes. Like there is some like obviously there are some other episodes that do humor a little differently, but like and I do like that humor too. Um, but I have to be honest, Bradley, it was his birthday, and that's one of the funniest bits in the whole show for me. I have to be honest. Um, yeah, like I feel like if we're talking coming from it with like the humor bits, like I feel like I don't know, maybe episode 6 has less humor. No, they all kind of do have like a lot. And obviously the show started with more humor before it became more lore intensive and all these things. Um in terms of this distant future or alternate timeline, I do think it's distant future. Um like I like that they like changed all of these different characters visually except for like Starjar, who is completely normal because it's Starjar. But like No Way looks different and is like more battered. You have Wheel being like super powered, and then Spectral Tile and Polka Dots all like messed up, and like I don't know. It's a very I really like how they did these redesigns, and I think it makes the episode really interesting. Obviously, it means there's no contest. Obviously, it means whatever, but they still have a objective goal that they're doing, being like conquering this watchtower. So it still makes the episode entertaining, rather than something like I don't know, because like Teapot, I think it's Teapot 11 or 12 or whichever one where they are just in 4 is like one of my least favorite episodes of Teapot, and it's purely because they take so long to do anything. It's only lore implicative. Um, there's no like funny part. There's no. It's just very like whatever. Like at the very least, the start of this episode is normal. The end of this episode gets normal, and in the middle, you at least have like a bunch of the contestant characters doing things, like doing a thing that is akin to a challenge, which maybe you could say, oh, that's like similar, but like I feel like with like the groups doing different things, I don't know. I didn't like that Teapot episode much, and I like this a lot more. So I have to be honest, it's not my favorite episode of the season. I think episode 6 is probably still better, and there might even be other ones where I'm like, oh, yeah. But like episode 6 is great. Even episode 7, which I know was such a like disappointment initially for me because it was just not episode 6 anymore. It just wasn't. I still liked it a lot. Um, so I don't know. Um, but yeah, this episode. I mean, again, I wanted to go do a temporary hiatus to wait to talk on to do like my Switch stuff later this week in terms of like, oh, my week's out from the Switch Direct, which of course it's not going to be weeks anymore because we are 9 days away as of me recording this, and then of course the week's out from the Switch 2 reveal. I could still do it where I would maybe group them together as I did prior, but I am not entirely feeling it. I mean, I don't know. I could also wait and do a day before thing, so, but I probably will end up just doing a bunch. I could also do it that maybe like I do that's the 69th of this year because obviously old that moment when revived is pretty unrelated. Um, so I don't know. But whatever. I think it's not that big of a deal. Um, but yeah, I think this episode is great. I think that the whole show is in like if I had to do an OSC tier list, this is certainly in A or S tier. It's one of the shows that now like I feel like I can rewatch pretty consistently. And now that it's longer, it's not just short. It's not just like 4 episodes. Like I remember rewatching, a bunch of the early ones, especially back when it was only through 6. But like even before that, right? I used to rewatch this show a little bit, and now I really am. I do hope that like Race for the Keys and stuff, which is also made by Derpadon, would also get finished at some point. Like there are other things that I hope they can finish, and I know that the popularity of this show does mean that obviously a lot of time and effort is being poured into it, but I do hope other stuff's happening. I also am perfectly happy with the fact that this episode is not as long as many of the other episodes, like the fact it's only like 12 minutes versus like 17 or whatever. Like, I just don't think you need to have longer episodes. Like, save on the animation time if you can. The animation in this episode has some parts that are incredible, some parts that are fine, and that generally is okay with me. I don't necessarily need every show to be Teapot. I really don't. In terms of animation, and yeah, I don't know. I really like what they're doing. I think it's pretty great. I think in terms of, obviously it's not done, but I would like to give a preemptive rating of the show in present, between episodes 1 and 8 of a pretty. I mean, OSC is impossible to rate, really, but because obviously I have so much bias towards these kinds of shows. Like, they just are more fun and entertaining for me, even if they are worse. And so, like, I could just give it a 9, but like, it doesn't feel accurate. So I'll give it a low 9 right now. It definitely has problems, but they're not very major. Again, it's like a couple of bits, like the clock is flying, let's put all the recommended characters there. That's annoying, but at least Starfy is just repeated 8 times, or really big, or there's a bunch of Starfies, because Starfy bit, I don't know why that is a good bit. It's funny. So anyway, that's all I have to say. And the moment when, yeah, that moment when and it's time for the are pretty like similar like sounding things. That's pretty funny. But yeah.